Parker told herself she could ignore Alice at work. She was wrong. Because Alice Bradley wasn't just interested. She was relentless. And the more Parker pulled away, the closer Alice got. This is an original fictional story. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or to actual events is purely coincidental. If I had been a weaker person, I would have quit by Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not with tears or a slammed glass door or a badly worded resignation sent at 2:14 a.m. I would have done it cleanly. A short email. A polite lie. A graceful retreat. Thank you for the opportunity. After careful consideration, I've decided to pursue another direction. Another direction being anywhere on earth that did not involve sitting in a conference room while the woman I had spent Sunday night with looked at me like she was replaying the entire thing in 4K. But I was not weak. And I had not fought my way into Bradley Capital Group just to be driven out by one dangerously well-dressed board member with a perfect mouth and no sense of reasonable boundaries. So I stayed. I finished the meeting. I kept my face composed. I took notes I would barely remember later because half my brain was occupied by the fact that Alice Bradley, had sat across from me looking so polished and powerful it should have erased all trace of the woman from the night before, and somehow it had only made her worse. When the meeting adjourned, the room broke into movement and low conversations. Chairs slid back. Tablets snapped shut. One of the older board members stopped Mike to ask about an acquisition timeline. Another asked me a follow-up question about retention behavior, which I answered on pure training and adrenaline. I was almost out. Almost. Then I heard her behind me. Parker. My name and Alice's voice had become a problem very quickly. I turned because pretending not to hear her in a room full of board members would have looked childish, and if there was one thing I refused to be in that building, it was childish. She stood by the long black table with one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. The blazer she'd worn in the meeting was open now, revealing more of the cream silk beneath it, and I hated that even in fluorescent corporate daylight she still looked like temptation with an annual bonus. Well, she said, a small wicked glint in her eyes. This just made Monday interesting. I looked at her for a full beat. Then I said, quietly and clearly, for you maybe. Her smile deepened. Definitely for me, she said. A sane person would have walked away. I did walk away. The trouble was, I could feel her gaze on my back the entire time. That was the first thing I learned about working in the same orbit as Alice Bradley. She did not rush. She did not swarm. She did not do anything clumsy enough to be called obvious. No. Alice had the kind of patience that only belonged to people who were used to large stakes and delayed outcomes. She knew how to wait, how to position herself, how to let pressure build until the other person felt it without being able to point to the exact second it started. By the time I got back to my desk, I had convinced myself I could manage this. The strategy was simple. Professional at all times. No private conversations. No acknowledgement of the night. No looking at her longer than basic business required. No matter what she did, I would act like she was exactly what she was supposed to be to me, a member of the board and nothing else. This strategy lasted until 4:12 p.m. That was when my inbox chimed and I saw an internal message from Alice Bradley. No subject line. Just one sentence. You left me a note and not a number. That feels unnecessarily cruel. I stared at the screen, then at the sender name, then back at the screen. I should have ignored it. Instead I typed, "This is a work platform." Her response appeared almost instantly. And yet here you are answering me on it. I did not answer that one. 3 minutes later, another message arrived. For the record, I liked the note. No one leaves my apartment at dawn, Parker. They usually start looking for reasons to stay. You smiled at me in your sleep and then disappeared before sunrise. That was new. I went very still. Something low and strange moved through my chest. That detail, small, arrogant, unguarded, did more damage than the flirting. Because there it was. That note I had wanted kept alive. That suggestion that something in her had shifted too. Not love. Not anything absurd that early. Just interest sharpened into something more alert. Something that had not happened to her often. I forced myself to breathe, then typed. You seem to be recovering well. Her reply. I woke up alone and smiled. That should worry both of us. I stared at that for much too long before locking my screen. When I finally looked up, I found myself meeting my own reflection in the dark glass wall beside my desk. Calm face. Professional blouse. A woman who absolutely should not have felt warmed by a sentence like that. I hated Miami. I really did. Tuesday morning, I arrived determined to reestablish my sanity. The office was cool, bright, and efficient in the way expensive offices always were. The coffee tasted like it had been approved by a committee. People moved quickly but never looked rushed. Screens glowed. Glass walls reflected a city that seemed permanently lit for a commercial no one had agreed to star in. I wore navy that day. Structured blazer. Ivory blouse. Hair pinned back. Small earrings. Nothing soft. I wanted to look like a woman no one would confuse with the one who had gripped white sheets in a penthouse the night before. It almost worked. Until I stepped into the elevator on the 12th floor and the doors slid shut just as another hand appeared between them. The doors reopened. Alice stepped in. Of course she did. She was in charcoal that morning, almost silver in the cold elevator light, the jacket cut close at the waist, the silk beneath it black this time. Her heels were sharp, her watch different, her hair smoother than yesterday, pulled behind one ear on one side so a gold earring caught the light when she turned. She looked at me, then at the empty elevator, then back at me. Well, she said, my week just improved. I stared straight ahead. Good morning. That was frigid. It was professional. I don't remember you being professional on Sunday. Heat flashed through me, so fast I almost turned and stabbed her with my badge. I kept my eyes on the closing doors. Do you speak to all employees like this? Only the ones I take personally. That made me look at her. She had that look on her face again, half amused, half predatory, fully in control. I lowered my voice. You cannot do this here. Do what? Act like nothing happened while also acting like everything happened. Her mouth curved. That's an excellent sentence. I mean it. So do I. She leaned back lightly against the polished wall of the elevator, one ankle crossing over the other. You vanished before sunrise. You joined my company on Monday. You challenged retention assumptions in front of two men who haven't updated their thinking since 2009. Something definitely happened. It is not your company. No, she said. Just a significant part of it. That should not have been attractive. Neither should the confidence. Neither should the fact that she said it without puffing herself up. Without performance. Just fact, like gravity or market volatility. The elevator dinged at my floor. I moved to step past her. She shifted just enough that I had to stop. Not because she blocked me completely. Because she made me aware of her body in space in a way that felt deeply intentional. My pulse jumped. Alice. It came out quieter than I intended. Her eyes softened, barely. There it is. What? The way you say my name when you're irritated. Her gaze dropped once to my mouth, then back up. I like that much more than I should. Move. She did. But as I passed, she said in a voice only I could hear, you can avoid me all you want, Parker. That only works if I decide to make it easy. I made it to my desk with my dignity technically intact and my heartbeat absolutely not. That became the rhythm of the next week. Alice never crossed a line so crudely that anyone else would see it and call it what it was. She was far too smart for that. But she had ways of appearing at exactly the wrong moment with exactly the right expression. A question during a strategy review, directed to me when she already knew I had the answer. A glance across a room that lasted a fraction too long. A pause at the end of a meeting, just enough to force me to walk out beside her. A single sentence dropped low at my shoulder while others spoke over us. You look better angry than most people do happy. You always do this with women? Only when I'm serious. That last one stopped me. Not visibly, I hoped. But she saw it. Of course she saw it. Mike saw more than I wanted him to by Thursday. He was not stupid. In fact, it was increasingly clear that one reason he was good at running a company was that he noticed shifts in people before they became obvious. He noticed who overprepared, who filled silence too fast, who pretended not to dislike each other while moving 3 chairs farther apart in conference rooms. So when he asked me to stay after a team review, I already knew I was not going to enjoy the next 5 minutes. He closed the glass door to his office but did not sit behind the desk. Instead, he leaned one shoulder against it, arms folded, expression unreadable in a way that reminded me suddenly and unpleasantly of his sister. How's the first week treating you? He asked. Well, that sounded edited. It's my first week. I'm trying not to be memorable for the wrong reasons. His mouth twitched. That's usually a good instinct around here. I waited. He studied me for a second longer, then said, "If my sister is making that harder than it needs to be, I'd prefer to know." My face stayed still by force. "That's a direct question. I'm a direct person. That runs in the family." That actually made him laugh once, short and genuine. Then he sobered. "Parker, you're very good," he said. "Which is why I'm going to be blunt. Alice gets interested in things. Ideas. People. Projects. Sometimes that interest burns bright and fast." I held his gaze. "Are you warning me about your sister, or managing risk for the company?" "Yes." Honest. Irritatingly honest. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I'm capable of handling my work." "I didn't say you weren't." "No," I said. "You implied I might become a distraction." His expression shifted. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" He exhaled slowly. "I'm saying I do not want to lose a strong analyst because my sister mistakes intensity for permanence." There it was. Not cruel. Not condescending. Protective. And somehow that made it worse. Because it was exactly the kind of warning I would have given someone else if I were standing in his place. I looked down briefly at the folder in my hands, then back at him. "With respect, Mike, whatever assumptions you're making about me, you can stop." His brow lifted. "Can I?" "Yes." "Good," he said. "Because I would prefer to be wrong." I should have left it there. Instead I said, "So would I." For the first time, something like real concern flickered across his face. That annoyed me immediately, because I did not need his pity. His concern, maybe. His respect, definitely. But not pity. He must have seen that in my expression, because his tone changed. "For what it's worth," he said, "Alice only gets under your skin this badly if you matter." I let out a disbelieving breath. That is not comforting. It wasn't intended to be. There it was again. Family resemblance. I left his office feeling sharper around the edges than when I'd entered it. That evening, I stayed late partly because I had work and partly because I wanted the building nearly empty before I risked going to the garage and discovering Alice in some strategically lit hallway. At 7:40, I walked out with my laptop bag on my shoulder and my mind still in numbers. At 7:41, I heard heels behind me. "You're avoiding me with admirable discipline," Alice said. I kept walking. "I'm working." "So am I." It is almost 8. Some of us are ambitious. I pressed the elevator button. Some of us have boundaries. That sounds personal. The elevator opened. We stepped in. No one else. Again. I turned to face her before the doors fully closed. "What exactly do you want from me?" Her expression changed instantly. Gone was the amused board member ease. Not completely, but enough. What replaced it was more focused. More real. "You want the polished version or the honest one?" she asked. "The honest one." Her eyes held mine. "I wanted one night," she said quietly. "Then you left my place before dawn, joined a meeting Monday morning, spoke like you belonged there, and looked at me like I was the worst thing that had ever happened to your concentration. Now I want to know what happens if you stop running." My breath caught, unwanted and immediate. The elevator hummed downward. I hated that answer because it was too good. Too honest, or honest enough to be dangerous. I folded my arms. "That sounds like curiosity, not sincerity." "Is that what you need?" "Sincerity. I need this not to become a game." Her voice dropped. "It stopped being a game the second you walked into that boardroom." The elevator doors opened onto the garage. I stood very still for a moment, because the worst part was that I believed her. Then I shook my head once. "That is not my problem." And I walked out before she could say anything else. On Friday afternoon, HR sent the company-wide gala memo. Of course they did. Annual donor and partner event. Black tie optional. Attendance strongly encouraged for leadership, senior staff, and select new hires. Venue. A waterfront hotel in South Beach that was known for white stone, impossible lighting, and people pretending not to look at each other's watches. I should have deleted the email and moved on. Instead, I stared at it until my screen dimmed. By 5 o'clock, Alice was in my doorway. Not physically in the frame. That would have been too blatant. Just on the other side of the glass, one finger hooked loosely around a folder, gazed steady on me through the panel until I finally looked up. I stepped out before anyone could decide to become curious. "No." She smiled. "I didn't ask yet." "You were going to." I was. "No." "Parker." "No." She tilted her head, studying me with a calm that I increasingly suspected she used to hide impatience. You haven't heard the invitation. I do not need to. You do. It's excellent. That alone is a reason not to listen. Her laugh came low and quick. Come to the gala with me. I stared at her. Absolutely not. She lowered her voice. You'd rather walk in alone and spend the whole evening pretending not to notice me? I would rather stay home and exfoliate. Cruel. I'm serious. So am I. We were standing at the edge of the executive floor, glass walls reflecting the late afternoon sun in long pale streaks. Outside, Miami was all gold glare and bay water. Inside, people moved past at a distance. Close enough for caution. Too far to hear. Alice took one step nearer. Not enough to touch. Enough to shift the air. Come with me, she said. One evening. No office politics. No pretending we don't know each other. We barely do know each other. That's fixable. No. Parker. No. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. It was the first visible sign of frustration I had seen in her, and I disliked how satisfying I found it. You're enjoying this, she said. I'm surviving this. That's dramatic. No, I said. This is dramatic. You cornering me at work because you're not used to someone saying no to you is dramatic. Something flashed in her eyes. Not anger exactly. Something sharper. Pride struck in the wrong place. You think that's what this is? I think you don't like being denied. Most people don't. You especially. She held my gaze for a long second. Then, and only then, she made the mistake. If you keep refusing to come with me, she said, voice still soft but edged now, my brother is eventually going to hear about Sunday anyway. Silence. Every part of me went cold. There are lines a person draws around herself not because she is fragile, but because she understands exactly what happens when someone crosses them. That was one. I looked at Alice very carefully. I'm sorry, I said, and my voice had gone so calm it no longer sounded like mine. Was that supposed to convince me? Her expression shifted the instant she heard herself from outside herself. Bad move. She knew it. I knew she knew it. But knowing did not erase it. Parker. No, I took one step back. Do not say my name like that after saying something like that. She exhaled once, controlled, furious at herself more than at me. I shouldn't have phrased it that way. You shouldn't have thought it. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Her eyes searched my face. I meant I am tired of pretending you mean nothing to me. And that gave you permission to threaten me? I wasn't threatening you. I looked at her in flat disbelief. She closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again. And for the first time since I had met her, Alice Bradley looked genuinely wrong-footed. I am bad at not forcing outcomes, she said quietly. That is not the same as wanting to hurt you. That answer hit harder than an excuse would have, because it was so ugly and so honest. I should have walked away immediately. Instead, I said, you don't get to push me because you're impatient. No, she said. No. No, her voice lowered even more. You're right. The admission landed between us with surprising weight. I searched her face for arrogance, deflection, charm, anything easy. What I found instead made me less steady than I wanted to be. Regret. Real regret, which looked uncomfortably good on her. I hated that too. I'm not one of your acquisitions, I said. A faint, humorless smile touched her mouth. That sentence should not be as attractive as it is. Stop doing that. Doing what? Making everything sound like flirtation. It isn't everything. Enough. She went still. Then she nodded once. Come to the gala. I let out a dry, disbelieving breath. That apology lasted 4 seconds. It wasn't an apology. It was surrender on one point. That is not better. A pause. Then more quietly, come because if you walk in alone, everyone will try to claim you. Come because I would rather stand next to you than scan a ballroom for you all night. Come because if I owe you an evening where I behave like a civilized person, I can do that. I folded my arms tighter. And what do I get out of it? Her eyes moved over my face with infuriating care. An evening in a dress that will probably ruin my concentration in public this time. I almost smiled. Almost. That annoyed me. She saw it anyway. There she is, she murmured. Don't. Come with me. I should have said no again. I probably would have, if she had kept pushing the wrong way. But this version of Alice, controlled, regretful, still impossible, but trying, was much harder to refuse than the one who had reached for leverage out of impatience, so I gave her the answer I would later regret. "One evening," I said. "And if you make me regret it, I leave." Her entire face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough that I saw, very clearly, how rarely she had to work this hard for anything that mattered to her. "One evening," she agreed. "Public behavior only." That made one corner of her mouth lift. "Cruel. I mean it. Parker," she said, and the way she said it should have come with warning labels. "I am going to be a model of restraint." I looked at her. "That sounds impossible. For you?" "Extremely." I went home irritated with myself, which is how I knew I was in trouble. The gala was on Saturday. Miami did what it always did before sunset, turned itself cinematic without permission. Light caught on windows. The water brightened, then deepened. Palm shadows sharpened. The whole city looked like it had been designed by someone with excellent taste and poor emotional boundaries. I changed 3 times. That should tell you enough. The final choice was black. Not soft black. Not sweet. A silk dress cut clean down the body with a high slit at one leg and an open back that made me feel dangerous in a way I did not trust. Minimal jewelry. Hair down in smooth waves. Heels just high enough to make me stand like I was daring the room to underestimate me. I kept my makeup simple, except for the mouth, which I made slightly darker than usual because I wanted armor and found it in lipstick. When the message came from Alice, "I'm downstairs," I looked at the screen for a full 5 seconds before picking up my bag. The car waiting outside was black, discreet, gleaming under the building lights. Alice stepped out before the driver could open my door. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. She was in white again. Of course she was. Not the same suit as the first night. This one was sharper, evening cut, almost liquid under the streetlights. The jacket fit like it had been argued into existence. Under it, a silk top the color of champagne. Gold at her ears. Gold at one wrist. Hair loose tonight, bright and smooth against the pale structure of her clothes. She looked me over once. Slowly. And the expression that crossed her face made my pulse stumble, so hard it was almost embarrassing. "Say something normal," I said, because otherwise I was going to feel it everywhere. Her eyes lifted to mine. "I was going to," she said. "Then you walked outside looking like that." That is not a sentence. It's the only one I currently have. Against my will, I laughed. That seemed to steady us both. "You clean up well," I said. "Parker." Her gaze dropped once briefly to the line of my throat. That is an insult to language. I got into the car before she could do more damage. The ride to the hotel was dangerous in the quiet way some nights are dangerous. Soft city lights. Low leather seats. Too much awareness. She kept her word, technically. She did not touch me. She did not crowd me. But she looked. And there is a particular kind of woman whose looking feels almost physical. "You're angry with me," she said after a few minutes. "Yes." "You still came." "Yes." "That should encourage me. It should make you careful." Her mouth curved, but there was respect in it. Real respect. Noted. The hotel was all white stone and candlelight and impossible floral arrangements. Open terraces. Glass walls looking onto black water. People in silk, tuxedos, and million-dollar calm. Soft jazz drifting somewhere in the background. Waiters moving through the crowd with trays of champagne that sparkled like lies. The second we stepped inside, I understood what Alice meant. Attention shifted. Not because I was with her, though that was part of it. Because together we looked like a story people wanted details on. Alice put one hand lightly at the small of my back, not possessive, not pressing, just enough to guide me through the room, and every nerve in my body registered it. People greeted her constantly. Board members. Investors. Women in silver gowns with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones. Men with practiced smiles and old money hands. Alice handled them all with perfect ease. Warm enough to charm. Cool enough to stay unclaimed. And through all of it, I watched her work. This, I realized, was part of why she was dangerous. Not just because she was beautiful. Not just because she was rich. But because she could move through power without ever seeming impressed by it. She belonged to rooms like this the way fire belongs to heat. At one point, a donor's wife complimented my dress and asked how long Alice and I had known each other. I felt the shift beside me. Alice did not miss a beat. "Long enough to know I'm having a very good evening," she said. The woman laughed, delighted. I looked straight ahead and murmured from the corner of my mouth, "Public behavior only." Alice's smile did not move. That was public. Barely. Cruel. We spent an hour in that strange, glittering rhythm. People talking. Alice being brilliant. Me answering when spoken to, observing everything, hating how good we looked together. Then the band shifted into something slower. The lights dimmed slightly over the dance floor, and Alice turned to me. "Dance with me." That sounds like a terrible idea. It probably is. That is not persuasive. Her gaze held mine. "Come anyway." I should have refused. Instead, I let her lead me onto the floor. The first touch was careful. Her hand at my waist. Mine on her shoulder. Our other hands joined, the gold of her rings cool against my fingers for one brief second before warmth replaced it. Then we moved. She was good. Of course she was. Not showy. Precise. Steady. The kind of dancer who made you feel the shape of the music through control, not performance. We turned under low amber light while the bay glittered beyond the glass, and for the first few moments I told myself this was manageable. Then she drew me a fraction closer. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me to stop breathing quite normally. "You promised restraint," I said. "I am being restrained." "This is restrained?" "For me." Her eyes dropped briefly to my mouth, then came back. Heroically. I nearly laughed, which would have been safer. Instead, I looked at her. Really looked. The line of her throat above silk. The faint pulse there. The pale gold at her ears. The calm in her face that never quite hid the intensity underneath it. She was so composed in public that it took attention to notice how much she was feeling. I noticed. That was the problem. "You are impossible," I murmured. She smiled very slightly. "And yet here you are." The music kept moving around us, low and slow. People drifted at the edges of the floor. One turn brought us closer to the glass wall, city lights breaking behind her shoulder. "You were right about one thing," Alice said quietly. "That's a broad category." I smiled when I woke up alone. I stilled slightly. She kept guiding us in soft, unhurried movement. "I don't smile when people leave," she said. "Usually I decide they stayed too long." Something in my chest tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you should know Sunday was not normal for me." Her hand at my waist flexed once, almost imperceptibly. "You left," she continued, voice low enough that it felt private even in a ballroom full of people. "And instead of being annoyed, I wanted to know when I'd see you again." I looked up at her. For one dangerous second, the room blurred. That was what made Alice so difficult to fight at close range. Not the arrogance, though there was plenty of that. Not the beauty, though God knew that was a problem. It was the flashes of honesty she dropped into the middle of all that control. The places where she let me see the actual woman inside the spectacle. "You really are bad at making this easy," I said softly. "Easy is rarely memorable." That sounds like a slogan on a terrible wall print. Her laugh brushed my skin like something warmer than sound. "There you are," she murmured. I was wondering when the smart mouth would come back. It never left. "No," she said. "I'm starting to understand that. I should have stepped away then." Instead, we kept dancing. And the worst part, the truly dangerous part, was that somewhere in the middle of the music and the light in her hands steady at my waist, I stopped thinking about how to leave. I started thinking about what it would feel like if she turned her head just slightly and said something reckless against my ear. That was when I knew I needed distance. I stepped back. Immediately. Cleanly. Alice's hand fell from my waist, but her expression sharpened at once. "What happened?" "This," I said, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "This is what happened." Her gaze searched my face. "Parker." "No," I shook my head once. "You don't get to look at me like that after this week and expect me not to notice." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not victory. Not even satisfaction. Recognition. She knew exactly what I meant. "What way am I looking at you?" she asked, voice low. I laughed once under my breath, incredulous. "That is a cruel question." "Answer it." "No." "Parker." "No," I said again, stronger now, because if I stayed soft for one more second, I was going to do something stupid in the middle of a ballroom. "You do not get to push me, corner me, threaten to expose a private mistake, and then dance with me like this and act confused that I'm furious." The last word landed. Her face changed. She went still. Really still. And beneath the glamour and the impossible self-control, I saw it hit. Good. It should. I told you I was angry, I said. You don't get to outcharm that. For a moment neither of us moved. The song continued around us, stupidly beautiful. The room glowed. The bay glittered black beyond the windows. Somewhere behind us, people laughed over champagne. Alice looked at me the way only a truly proud person looks when she has no defense worth offering. Then she said quietly, "You're right." The simplicity of it almost undid me. I folded my arms across my body, partly for distance, partly because I needed to hold myself somewhere. I know. One corner of her mouth moved, brief and humorless. That's becoming a pattern. You'll live. Maybe. Her gaze held mine. Will you let me fix it? I should have said no. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was no. Instead I said, "I'm here, aren't I?" Her eyes darkened at that, but she did not step closer. Not this time. Good. Because if she had, I did not fully trust myself to keep making wise decisions in a room full of mirrors and candlelight. If you're still with me, like the story, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and which part is getting to you most. Alice waking up smiling, the elevator tension, Mike's warning, or the dance at the gala. That kind of support is exactly what keeps stories like this moving. Alice glanced toward the terrace doors, then back at me. Walk with me. I hesitated, then nodded once. We stepped out onto the terrace where the air was warmer, salted, realer. The music softened behind the glass. The wind moved the edge of my dress against my leg. Below us, the water caught broken strips of light from yachts and city towers. For a while neither of us spoke. Alice rested both hands lightly on the stone railing and looked out over the bay. "You were never a mistake," she said at last. I turned toward her slowly. "That is not the word I used." "No," she looked at me. "But it's the word you're trying very hard not to feel." I hated that she was right often enough to make it a structural issue. She went on before I could answer. "What I said to you at the office was wrong. Not because I didn't mean the part about not wanting this to stay hidden forever." Her jaw tightened slightly. "But because I used pressure when what I wanted was honesty." The wind caught a strand of her hair and lifted it across her cheek. She did not move to fix it. "I'm not used to wanting things slowly," she said. "I see an outcome and I move. That works well in business. Less well here." "Here," I repeated, watching her. "With you." The city glittered behind her. It should have made the moment feel artificial. Instead, it made it feel sharper. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked softly. "Do you know how impossible you are?" A faint smile. "Constantly." That was not a compliment. "I know." I exhaled and looked away toward the water. For a few seconds, there was only wind, glass, distant music, and the maddening awareness of her standing beside me in white silk and apology. Then Alice said, "Come to dinner with me." I turned back. "You are unbelievable." "I've heard. I am standing on a terrace with you because I made one bad decision and then several medium-sized ones. And yet, stop saying that. You love when I say that." "I do not." She smiled then, really smiled, and God help me, there was something almost relieved in it. "Dinner," she said. "No gala crowd. No office. No leverage. No strategic crimes against your patients. Just dinner." I stared at her. "Why?" Her answer came too fast to be polished. "Because one night with you is not enough, and I am trying, against my nature, to do this properly." That hit me somewhere low and dangerous. I looked at her for too long. Then I said the only thing available to me. "We'll see." For a woman like Alice, that should have sounded like nothing. Instead, she looked at me like I had just handed her a future she intended to negotiate aggressively. And that was exactly why I stepped back. Because I could feel it happening. The shift. The slide. The part where resistance stopped being purely self-protection and started becoming something else. Something hotter, riskier, harder to defend. I looked at her once more, then toward the ballroom behind the glass. "I'm leaving soon," I said. Her eyes stayed on mine. "Do you want me to stop you?" "Yes," I said before I could stop myself. Feet. Then more quietly, "No." Something almost tender crossed her face, which was infinitely more destabilizing than the arrogance ever had been. "All right," she said. And that should have been the end of the evening. It wasn't. Because just before I turned to go back inside, Alice said my name again. I looked over my shoulder. She stood in the warm Miami dark, one hand still on the stone railing, white silk moving faintly in the wind, and asked in a voice that went straight through me. "Parker, what happens when you stop fighting me long enough to admit you want this too?" That question followed me all the way home. Into the elevator. Into my apartment. Into the mirror while I unpinned my hair. Into bed, where I lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying not to replay her hand at my waist, her apology on the terrace, the exact look in her eyes when she said one night with me had not been enough. And that was the real problem. Not Alice Bradley herself. Not even the fact that she was relentless, beautiful, and constitutionally incapable of leaving intensity alone. The problem was that somewhere between Sunday night and the gala terrace, I had started wanting an answer to her question. And once a woman like Alice sensed that, resisting her was no longer just difficult. It was war. If you want part 3, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and whose side you're on right now, Parker's caution or Alice's pursuit. In the next part, Alice changes tactics. Parker finally starts cracking for real, and one overheard conversation blows everything apart.